Whew, you're gonna have to pitch me. If I am in fact awake, then comic movies are back, guys. Now, my gut said I should open this video with an enthusiastic Superman is back, because it's true, but maybe we should start by acknowledging the elephant in the room.
Let's do it, Cronkite.
For the last 10 years, a schism has gradually formed between fans of Zack Snyder's DC work and the studio's competing creative visions. This division has grown acrimonious to the point that many feel like they need to take a hardline binary stance. There are Snyder fans, and then there's everyone else. This certainly was not helped by James Gunn stepping from the MCU into an executive role at a DC whose creative mandate was to push the studio in a lighter direction. But I strongly believe that Gunn and Snyder are not enemies.
Just saw your new cut of Superman, and word of advice, he's the man of steel, not the man of conversation.
In fact, I'm a huge fan of their respective bodies of work. So with this video, I'd like to reach across the aisle. This Superman, he's for all of us. Now, let's rock for real. Specifically, let's talk about how for the last 20 years, Hollywood has been fundamentally confused about what to do with Big Blue, or as I like to call him, Superman. Because here's the thing, Superman is, on paper, the easiest superhero in the world to understand. He's the prototype, the blueprint, the reason the genre exists at all. But in practice, he's somehow become the hardest to get right. How do you depict the elemental primordial ooze that birthed the genre when it has been iterated upon 100 times with progressively mixed results? Well, let's take a little trip through the modern era of Superman adaptations. Back in 2006, Warner Brothers gave us Superman Returns, directed by Bryan Singer, whose name I will pretend is not a giant can of worms for the purpose of keeping this video under 2 hours and free of references of Kevin Spacey.
I'm dead serious.
The film wasn't bad. In fact, there's some strong filmmaking and iteration on the formula that I really enjoy. Brandon Routh gives a genuinely tender, respectful performance, and there are moments that feel ripped straight from the Donner era of the late 70s. But that was both an element of its charm and its central problem. Superman Returns was basically a love letter to a movie from 30 years prior. It wasn't trying to be new or relevant, but simply trying to resurrect something. The end result then felt awkward, almost suspended between eras. It was clicks too nostalgic for a post-9/11 blockbuster, and far too earnest to go toe-to-toe with the predominant blockbuster sensibilities that would soon be christened by Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. Warner Brothers naturally panicked, not knowing how to retrofit its seemingly dated all-American hero for a modern audience. They caved to presumed market appetites and did what everyone else was doing. They went dark. They went gritty. They said, let's give Superman a brooding alien messiah complex. And that's how we got the Snyder Superman. Now, full disclosure, as I said before, I don't hate Man of Steel, not in the slightest. In fact, I love that film. And you can hear me gush about it and how it made me fall in love with the character of Superman in this video right here, a video I'm quite proud of. There's so much I find fascinating about both Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, the Ultimate Edition, and, Zack Snyder's Justice League as well. Snyder knows how to shoot mythic imagery like no one else. These are like splash pages out of a graphic novel, and his Superman looks incredible on screen. I also think Man of Steel and BVS are films that brilliantly deconstruct the idea of superheroes, specifically metahumans like Superman, in our world, a la a First Contact kind of story. But tonally, there's no denying the film was trying to approach Superman as Nolan approached Batman. Hell, David S. Goyer is the writer of Man of Steel, with Nolan acting as a producer. For the most part, it worked, and it was distinct, different, yet all the while a valid interpretation of Superman. Just not one everyone took to. And even me, someone who loves Snyder's trilogy, can admit that it put the hero on screen at fundamental odds with his essence, or at least how most people perceive the character. Instead of the optimistic beacon of hope we associate with the character, in Man of Steel, we got a Superman who was conflicted, alienated, haunted by the idea of having to save people who don't really care about him at all. And by the time the third act rolled around in Man of Steel and Metropolis was leveled in what basically amounted to destruction porn, audiences understandably tapped out. It wasn't just a creative misstep, but a crisis of confidence. Warner Brothers didn't believe Superman could succeed as himself, so they tried to make him someone else, tried to pair him with someone like Batman who audiences loved. And this led to the pop culture fixation with the evil Superman archetype. At some points in the last decade, culture got obsessed with the edgy Superman knockoff, Homelander in The Boys, Omni-Man in Invincible, and whatever the kid was called in Brightburn. Even Zack Snyder's own take on Black Suit Superman in Zack Snyder's Justice League leaned into the trope a bit, and it's not hard to understand why. In an era of global conflict and a corrosion of so-called American values, we're fascinated by the idea that absolute power corrupts absolutely. While initially interesting, this ultimately became the default mode. Just like Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool infected every tentpole with a desire to be smug and self-referential, audiences were inundated with this character type for years. At a certain point, we stopped believing that a character could be powerful and also good. And that brings us to the core problem. Superman has spent the 21st century trying to be anyone but himself. The fearful studio execs decided that the noble, selfless hero was dead to our cynical age. But maybe the truth is that it's less an issue of Superman being ill-suited to the present cultural moment and more about a culture losing hope for meaningful change. Enter James Gunn, one-time indie genre filmmaker who got his big break directing a Marvel film in his mid-40s. He rose to the challenge of being a nobody trying to assert himself in a heavily saturated space. To that end, Gunn's a guy who understands cultural baggage. Guardians of the Galaxy was about a team of literal nobodies. The movie knew that no one cared about Rocket Raccoon or Groot, and it made that irreverence part of the story. What initially seemed like an impossible box office gambit for Marvel ended up being one of the studio's biggest successes. Same with The Suicide Squad, where the whole premise was, what happens when the bad guys don't know how to stop being bad guys? Hell, with that one, he was mere years behind a prior Suicide Squad adaptation. If anyone was poised to fail, it was James Gunn, and yet his love and understanding of the material as an outsider makes him its perfect shepherd. So when Gunn got Superman, he asked the most obvious question. What does it mean to make a superhero movie in this cultural moment? And his answer, unlike his less creative studio exec forebearers, was not to reinvent Superman. It wasn't to deconstruct him. For Gunn, Superman didn't need to be fixed or essentially altered to meet the cynical appetites of 2025. He just needed to be exactly who he's been all along. That is what people love. That is the story. See, Gunn's Superman isn't just fighting aliens or Lex Luthor or some doomsday device. He's fighting a metatextual battle with the idea of Superman and the world's discomfort about what he represents. Does he need to be cooler, edgier? Should he dye his hair black and brood like Batman? No! What makes Superman so interesting is that he's a god who was raised by the Kents. They didn't teach him to crave power or wield influence. They just taught him to be kind. There's no messianic grandeur, no Nietzschean god complex, just the essential tension of having seemingly limitless power held at bay by an exacting conscience. James Gunn knows what we all now know. Having seen Superman, that is enough. Because here's the thing, we're tired. We are tired of superheroes who hate being superheroes. We're tired of the self-reflexive commentary and winking nihilism. Another hero comprised of resignation and bitterness is not what we need. Maybe we don't deserve Superman, but we should be grateful to have him. James Gunn knows how to get a team together. Gunn has always had a knack for casting, and he nails it here, which is especially important because this movie is really about the characters, not just Superman. I mean, fucking Nicholas Hoult, man. I mean, God, for many, it was hard to imagine Holt as Lex Luthor, but he's on screen for 30 seconds before you realize this is perfect casting. Meanwhile, David Corenswet is the best Superman of the post-Donner period, and it's an easy call. Rachel Brosnahan, on the other hand, is an amazing Lois Lane, dare I say the definitive Lois Lane. Their natural screen chemistry does much of the heavy lifting in understanding the push and pull between Superman's alien qualities and his desire to exist and love alongside humans. Gunn's Lois is the black cat to Clark's golden retriever. She's cynical, she's guarded, she's practical, but she's not a cardboard cutout of the career woman with no time for love trope. No, she's complex in that she knows she loves Clark, but she also knows that loving him means letting go of some of her armor, which is frankly terrifying. Meanwhile, Clark isn't playing games. He's not pretending not to care. He's in love, and he says so. but he's also not a pushover. There are moments when Lois shuts him down and he just walks away. It's a dynamic that feels real and honest and messy in the way that actual relationships are messy. For reference, think Spider-Man 2, think Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst. It's not about perfect dialogue, it's about authenticity, about the vulnerability of putting yourself out there and risking rejection. So much of this film is about Gunn humanizing Clark, that he is human, he always has been human, and that's at the forefront of this story. Yeah, he's an alien biologically, but he is human down to his core. He makes mistakes, he's not a perfect person, but he has conviction, and he has to learn to stop contorting himself into something that he's not. His choices, his actions, that defines him, as Pa Kent so eloquently puts. I think the great thing about Lois in this film is that, yes, she's hesitant to express her love of Superman in the relationship, but also she functions as a point of view for the audience. Lois needs to allow herself to love Superman, that she clearly has feelings for, resisting admitting feelings because he's too much, too optimistic, too silly, but maybe it's exactly what she needs, the same way people feel Superman is silly, but deep down we love him all the same. We love this big blue Boy Scout, this nerd, this guy who is genuinely a good person. And the whole film is about letting go of thinking he's dumb, outdated, old-fashioned, and just learning to embrace the fact that you love him for everything that he is. And Gunn beautifully layers this into a realistic relationship dispute between Lois and Clark, which is why I love the fact that the film already starts with them in a relationship. I mean, their romance is the fucking highlight of the movie. The chemistry, the way they're written is so honest and authentic, and yet it never falls into being schmaltzy, which I think it very easily could have. It allows these characters to be people, which is why I make the Tobey and Kirsten comparison. Clark Kent, being the dork he is, would have puppy love for someone like Lois Lane, and the journalist from a military family in Lois would be harder edged. She does her own thing and she knows exactly what she wants, and she self-sabotages a bit by not allowing herself to fully connect with Superman. Clark isn't a pushover. I mean, 2 times when he questions Lois what she means about she's not good at relationships or maybe they shouldn't be in a relationship, and she doesn't respond, he leaves. He doesn't degrade himself waiting for her to respond. While he does embody the golden retriever mentality, he's not a pushover. The same way that Lois is a bit more avoidant and reserved emotionally, but she still offers warmth and comfort when Clark learns the truth about his parents or his dog is abducted. There's so many moments where you can see that she is in love with Clark, and her journey throughout the film is coming to realize that she does love him. She just doesn't express it the same way. The relationship dynamic here is so perfectly realized. It being the core of the film is not only great for the movie, but it allows the plot to be a little looser because the emotional core is so firmly anchored. It's about Lois, the audience, realizing their relationship with Superman, with Clark, can work, and Clark grappling with his angst over purpose due to his parents, due to who he thought he was supposed to be, and then coming to recognize that it's his real parents, the Kents, who have humanized him, who have given him the tools to go out into the world and be this beacon of hope. Then there's the Justice Gang. They're cynical, corporate, performative. They don't really care or value human life. They're just there to get the job done and then go home. And then, yeah, if people are gonna, shout their name in the streets and adore them, that's a great bonus. But in that kaiju scene specifically, they act without care for the collateral damage that's going on, without who they might injure, versus the way Superman approaches the situation, where he's saving everything from this woman to a squirrel. Like, everything has value to Clark. And so he wants to find ways to approach the situation the most humane way possible. The Justice Gang are superheroes who've been swallowed by branding. Think, what if the MCU was run entirely by shareholders? Oh wait, that is the MCU. The thing that I love about Superman in his relation to the Justice Gang and how it differs from Superman traditionally being depicted as the morality police is the fact that Superman enters this world already in progress. The Justice Gang already exists, and so Clark never tells them how to be better. He just remains true to himself and acts as the person he is, and slowly, the Justice Gang start to realize that heroism isn't just about optics. Traditionally, the Justice League is assembled and they're kind of like Superman's disciples, but here they become an example of people trying to live the same way Superman is, not because he told them to, but because his actions speak for themselves. They are representative of the goodwill that he has put out into the world, which is why when Guy Gardner and the rest of the Justice Gang come to stop the Baravian invasion of Jaranpur towards the climax of the film, it's beautiful. It's great that Superman isn't the one to show up, even though the kid is holding the flag calling for Superman. That shows that being good and kind will have an impact, will make a difference, will inspire the right people. And then there's Lex Luthor, arguably the best Lex Luthor. Well, maybe at least on par with the great Gene Hackman. Gunn's Lex is an insecure narcissist with a genius complex. He wraps his ego in big speeches about humanity's evolution, but deep down, he's just mad that Superman exists. He's not the misunderstood genius trope. He's the petty guy who thinks he's the smartest person in the room. I mean, have you heard of a guy called Elon Musk? Well, the movie calls him out. Lex isn't evil because he's smart. He's evil because he's cruel. He likes having control, power, the upper hand. He's not advancing humanity. He's stroking his own ego. And the thing is, he tries to delude himself. He tries to twist this idea of being a genius that isn't given the credit he deserves into being something greater, with humanity being replaced and ruled by someone like Superman. But it turns out to be him feeling inferior, and that gets at him, that eats away at that ego inside. It's also a really effective deconstruction of the cruel genius trope. Intelligence makes you a mean person. Great men, great thinkers don't have time to consider other people, like Lex Luthor. So much of the film is taking this and distilling it into Lex being a dick. He's cruel in a way that's about fluffing his ego instead of being a genius. He creates these portals that destroy the world. He doesn't care. Mr. Terrific is a perfect contrast. He's cold and distant, yeah, but he still cares. He actually constantly makes a point about how reckless Lex Luthor is in opening up a pocket universe and how that's going to create a rift that'll destroy the world. He sees it as using intelligence irresponsibly. Lex is choosing to be cruel because it's convenient. He likes doing things like the pencil bit, where he knocks down a cup full of pencils and has his employees pick them up. And he keeps doing it because he knows that they'll be forced to grovel. That's how he operates in the macro as well. He's a petty, vain little man. He's smart enough to know how to play people and does that for his own sense of purpose and grandeur. Because he's charismatic and a pretty good showman, he's able to sell it in a way that appears more benevolent than that. And someone like Superman is undermining our collective sense of worth. It's a cult of fanboys who think he'll create a techno-utopia. Like he says, he is driven by envy. He tries to make it seem noble, but I mean, like, we know who Lex Luthor is. He's not hard to read. Then there's Eve, Lex's girlfriend, someone who is unexpectedly a highlight of the film. You expect her to be the arm candy airhead, particularly with her introduction, taking selfies during a moment of dangerous conflict, but she ultimately knows exactly how she's underestimated and weaponizes it. This is most clearly illustrated in the payoff to the gag where she's constantly taking selfies. We assume this is because she's vapid, but she's secretly taking photos of critical corporate information that she will eventually disclose to the Daily Planet. She's a small character, but she matters. In this Superman, everyone matters. Now, let's talk about how the film feels, because Gunn's Superman, like his forays with the Guardians and the Suicide Squad, isn't just about message. I mean, this thing has vibes, dude, and the joy of living in a comic book for a brief period of time. This movie is weird. It's really weird, and that's a feature. It feels like what would happen if you crossed Kingsman with Batman Forever, with a more careful attention to story and theme. Think hyper-stylized action, colors that pop, and a comic book logic that does not feel the need to ground itself or apologize. This is a movie visually, aesthetically, stylistically, whatever you want to say, that is truly inspired by comic books at its very core. And even then, it takes a page out of recent blockbuster sensations like Top Gun Maverick in the way that the flight scenes are filmed. It's big, it's immersive, it's IMAX ready. It prioritizes emotion over spectacle. You're not just watching Superman fly, but feeling why he loves it. There are many qualities that can be ascribed to James Gunn, but the one that really stands out here is his supreme confidence. He's boldly refusing the more self-serious outings of recent comic book history and is instead pulling from stuff like All-Star Superman, from the Justice League Unlimited series, the Superman animated series, places where people wear bright costumes and monologue sincerely. And this ultimately works because that's what people love about the source material. So many filmmakers grow insecure in trying to transpose cartoon worlds to live action, but Gunn clearly believes these aesthetics can exist just as richly in live action. And you know what? He's right. But don't let the cartoonish quality suggest that the film does not have something weighty on its mind. No, Gunn understands that Superman's best stories are animated by its sci-fi weirdness, and sci-fi is a famously political genre, drawing parallels between a heightened fictional climate and our present reality. Through this lens, Gunn uses Superman to tell a broad allegory about imperialism, colonization, and global power. The film introduces a technologically advanced nation invading smaller nations for land and resources. While it's not explicitly Israel-Palestine or explicitly Russia-Ukraine, it's timely enough in its observation that you can't help but feel the parallels. Gunn uses the aesthetics of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the genocidal actions of Israel in the Palestinian conflict, a nation invading, hell-bent on eradicating a certain demographic under the guise of peace and democracy. In the film, Baravia is even a close, longtime ally of the United States, with one of the strongest militaries in the world, backed, funded, and in alignment with United States defense contractors via Lex Luthor. Jor-El resembles a Middle Eastern country and is said to have had a troubled and complicated past. Even the way Lois and Clark talk about the conflict during Lois's interview with Superman feels reminiscent of the ongoing discourse surrounding the conflict. Superman intervened on his own accord to stop Baravia from carrying out violence on innocent Jor-Elians and has come under fire for seemingly aligning himself with a non-allied nation. Lois challenges Clark's actions by citing the Baravian mission of liberating the Jor-Elians from a tyrannical government, to which Clark responds with common sense, saying, "Yes, but you know that's not true." It's no secret that Baravia is corrupt and has been in cahoots with Luthor Corps. I mean, hell, everyone in the Daily Planet talks about it like it's a given, and that Baravia's actions are nothing more than an attempt to install their own regime. All of this is rather directly in conversation with the debate over Israel's intentions with Palestine. They claim to be acting as saviors, driven to free the Palestinians from the authoritarian rule of Hamas. However, most reasonable people see the destruction and death toll as an asymmetric response to an attack by bad actors as an excuse to control Gaza. The images of Baravian soldiers in full military gear surrounded by tanks and missiles encroaching on a crowd of Jor-Elian civilians, culminating in the attempted murder of the child holding a Superman flag, very clearly evoke footage of IDF soldiers invading civilian hospitals and schools in Gaza and the thousands of children murdered in the process. I mean, the whole film is centered around media manipulation in order to justify prejudicial actions, whether it's Baravia against Jor-El or Lex Luthor obsessively digging up whatever he can to cancel Superman, turn the public against him out of fear and security, simply because of his deep-seated, insecure hatred of his existence. I could go on, but I mean, these are unmistakable parallels, and it couldn't be more obvious. That's also what I admire about this film. For a movie of this status and popularity to so incisively confront the defining conflict of this decade and come out on the right side, on the side of morality, is astonishing. It floored me. Hell, most movies in general, regardless of size, won't even touch this issue due to its polarizing nature. But Gunn found a way. He strips away the labels and asks you to look at the core moral conundrum in the broader sense. Is dehumanization okay? Is genocide under the guise of peace okay? Is it okay to take what isn't yours just because you can? And spoiler alert, Superman's answer is no. Full stop. It's simple, it's radical, and it's exactly what we need right now. Ever since the film's release, people have been saying Gunn's authorial intent wasn't to comment on these issues, and that any similarities between the Moravian-Jaranpur conflict and the Israel-Palestine one are a result of viewers projecting what they want to see onto the material. That the understanding is at best a gesture and nothing more. Not only do I find that incredibly reductive of the work the film is doing, this wouldn't be the first time Gunn has commented on current events through his films. I mean, hell, the man used to be a political cartoonist in college. But whether or not Gunn intended to make a film whose geopolitical plot was about the Israel-Palestine conflict is irrelevant. The film may have been written before October 7th, simply depicting the broadest sense of an invasion by a much more powerful country run by a despot into a country that's problematic in terms of its political history, but has totally no defense against the other country, and it's not simply a few people reading too much into it. No, it's entire audiences who are receiving the message. And perhaps that says more about the state of our world and the never-ending cycle of colonialism than it does anything else. Gunn is savvy. He's in tune with current events and the problems we face, so it doesn't surprise me he managed to weave something so prescient into his script. Regardless, authorial intent is not the be-all, end-all of art analysis and commentary. The second a film, a piece of literature, or a painting leaves the artist's hands and enters the public, whatever intentions the artist, the author had, does not determine how it's received. Instead, it's up to the viewer to interpret the work as they see it. James Gunn may not have made a film explicitly about the ongoing geopolitical conflicts in our world at the current moment, but swathes of viewers, particularly young, passionate ones, are receiving it that way. And why shouldn't they? If someone watches Superman and walks away with more empathy for the nations under attack by genocidal maniacs and is inspired to speak out, rallying behind a just cause, that's fucking amazing. I can't tell you the last time a mainstream film like this had that kind of effect. That is the power of movies. If the film had a more convoluted conflict and/or featured too explicit parallels to present geopolitical conflicts, it would risk losing the essence of Superman in its minutiae. People would be distracted by their biases and wouldn't hear the message Gunn is sending, nor would they be forced to reflect on and possibly reconsider their own position regarding the conflict. This is and has always been DC's greatest strength. The fact that it exists in a world similar to our own, but is still firmly rooted in fiction. And it's high time they started playing into it. It isn't saddled with the baggage that comes from being set in the real world the way, say, Marvel is. We've seen firsthand how Marvel has had to tap dance around making any meaningful or direct statements regarding the state of our world and the ongoing conflicts that comprise it. Their films, most recently Captain America: Brave New World, a film billed as being a political thriller, is arguably their most pitiful and spineless effort yet. If you want to hear my full breakdown on that film's mealy-mouthed nonsense, you can check it out over here. In being an allegory, DC is able to make a far more direct and incisive commentary on current events in the world around us in a way people will be more receptive to. Gunn is able to distill these impassioned conflicts, namely Israel-Palestine, into a straightforward moral issue as he explores what it means to be good, what it means to have kindness, and stand alongside humanity against injustice, regardless of who it's coming from, in a world that seems to have lost so much of its humanity to the cynical state of things. Now, the movie takes a pretty controversial swing in its characterization of Superman's biological father, because in Gunn's Superman, Jor-El is, he's kind of a dick. I can understand why people are upset by that at first blush, but it's not a bug, it's a feature that helps to reinforce the themes of Superman and situate his place in the real world. In The Batman, Bruce has to grapple with the realization that Thomas Wayne wasn't the flawless paragon he'd mythologized. Turns out, dads are complicated, and Gunn's Superman takes a similar angle. Clark spends the first half of the movie treating Jor-El like this untouchable, idealized figure, the father he never knew, the voice from beyond. But then he learns the truth. Kryptonian culture, at least the way his parents saw it, was about supremacy and expansion. His goodness is not a divine mandate, but a choice that he has made. The Kryptonians in this film were basically a colonial empire in decline, and Jor-El's message to Clark is to continue the conquest. Instead of being a guy whose default mode is goodness, this Superman has to choose empathy over Kryptonian values. There's an emotional beat when Jonathan Kent, with regards to Superman learning the truth, says, "I think you interpreting it the way you did says a whole lot more about you than anything else." And that's the radical idea here. Superman isn't good because he was made to be. He's good because anyone, no matter who they are or where they're from, can choose goodness. It's not about rejecting Krypton out of self-loathing. It's about realizing that your origins don't define you. Your choices do. Now, some people have tried to argue that this storyline is problematic because it's supposedly about immigrant assimilation, i.e. Clark learns his heritage is bad, so he goes full American apple pie. But that's severely reductive reading. First of all, the film draws a hard line between Clark as a foster kid and Clark as an immigrant. Those are two separate narratives that get intertwined a lot in Superman stories, but Gunn's film is very careful to distinguish them. The foster kid angle? Well, that's Clark worshiping his absent biological parents because he's desperate for connection. All he has is half of a message, and because he's Clark Kent, he interprets that message in the most generous way possible. He fills in the blanks with hope, because that's what kids like him do. And when the truth about Jor-El comes out, it's devastating, but it also forces Clark to look inward, to realize that the people who actually raised him gave him everything he needs to be the man he is. It's the same as Peter Parker worshiping his dead parents in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, only to realize that Uncle Ben was the one who actually made him Spider-Man. The Immigrant Allegory is about something else entirely. It's about how the world treats Superman, not how Superman treats his heritage. Clark doesn't reject Krypton because he hates being Kryptonian. He rejects colonialism. He rejects supremacy. He rejects the idea that your culture or your genetic makeup predetermines your morality. Superman keeps his Kryptonian identity. He just chooses not to replicate Krypton's mistakes. On top of that, Jor-El is not the immigrant. Clark is. Therefore, the sins of the father should not be passed down to him. Clark's arc is him realizing he's not responsible for his parents' intentions for him. Once he realizes their intentions aren't in line with his core values, he begins to question who he is, eventually culminating in him becoming comfortable in rejecting the belief. He accepts that he can be a good person despite his parents' plans for him. The same way the rest of the world needs to accept that he can be from another world, from a family with ill intent, and be a good person. That's not to say Krypton is a bad culture. I mean, we don't really know enough about it yet, but his parents are expressing a viewpoint that comes across quite sinister, to say the least. In Gunn's script, it's made explicit that a person is not responsible for the misdeeds of the culture they're born into. Anyone can be good. Clark knows he's different. He knows he's not from here. But he also knows that he's human in every way that matters. He refuses to believe anyone is beyond saving. As Lois says, you look at everyone and think they're beautiful. That's the whole point of the Jor-Emporians, the politically embattled nation at the center of the movie's geopolitical conflict. Their history is being weaponized by bad faith actors to justify annexation and genocide. And Superman is not falling for the bullshit propaganda. He refuses to see people as binaried entities because he knows that he does not represent Kryptonian values. He stands up for the Jor-Emporians, not because they're perfect, but because they're human beings who don't deserve to be punished for the sins of their leaders. Textually, that's the opposite of assimilation. That's empathy. This Superman says your culture is not your destiny. Your parents are not your destiny. Your past is not your destiny. And in a world obsessed with inherited trauma, generational baggage, and the sins of the past, that's a pretty fucking radical message. So, what have we learned? In short, Superman doesn't need to change. We do. There's something endearing and relatable about a straight-edge nerdy guy learning to embrace that side of himself, embrace the goodness within him, and stop trying to pretend to be an edgier, angsty person. Of us, a culture that has shifted so far towards cynicism, taking everything in bad faith and refusing to recognize the humanity that exists in everyone, learning to stop trying so hard to be cynical, so hardcore, to allow our guards to fall and let the light, the warmth of sincerity in. We need it. We don't need to drag our heroes down to our level to make them relatable. We don't need to make Superman edgy or brooding or morally compromised to make him relevant. If he doesn't work in today's world, then that says more about today's world than it does about him. And if the fascist anti-immigrant political right is offended by this Superman, that means he's on the right side of history. Gunn's Superman is a tonic. It's a punk rock rebuttal to our culture's shift towards cynicism and cruelty. It's not about being cool, it's about being good. And if that feels radical, maybe that's a you problem.